My wife died 5 years ago, and I believed my heart would never beat for another soul again. At 72 years old, I met someone at watercolor painting class who completely shattered everything I thought I knew about love. The fear that rushed through me was absolutely terrifying, more intense than anything I'd experienced in decades. Friends, write in the comments where you're watching us from, and hit like if you want to discover what's most surprising and unexpected about finding love again after loss. Let me take you back to those empty evenings that stretched endlessly after Margaret passed away in 2019. My son Michael brought the grandkids over twice a week, filling the house with chaos and laughter that felt both healing and heartbreaking. But when those front doors closed and car engines faded down the street, the emptiness returned like a tide. I'd developed this routine that kept me functional. Morning coffee while reading yesterday's newspaper, afternoon walks to the grocery store I didn't really need. The evenings were the killers, though. Those long hours between dinner and sleep when couples usually share their day. It was losing my witness, you know? That person who knew why Tuesday's grocery store encounter was funny, or why the neighbor's new fence annoyed me. Margaret had been my translator for 47 years, the only person who understood my terrible jokes and forgave my stubborn moods. The thought of replacing her felt like betraying everything sacred we'd built together over nearly 5 decades. Plus, there was the practical terror. What would my kids think if their father started dating like some teenager? I could already hear the neighborhood gossip floating over backyard fences about that Peterson man and his foolish ideas. But the deepest fear, the one that kept me awake staring at the ceiling, was simpler and more brutal. Could a 72-year-old heart survive being shattered twice in one lifetime? That's exactly where my head was when Sarah practically forced me to sign up for the community center's watercolor painting class. "Dad, you need something to do besides reorganizing Mom's recipe cards for the 100th time," she said, with that gentle firmness daughters master. I protested that I had the artistic ability of a colorblind rhinoceros, but Sarah wasn't taking no for an answer. The first class was exactly as awkward as I'd predicted. 12 seniors, clutching brushes like foreign weapons, staring at blank paper. I'd chosen a seat in the back corner, hoping to paint my disasters in relative privacy and escape quickly when it ended. That's when I noticed her sitting directly across the room, attacking her canvas with the confidence of someone who clearly had no idea what she was doing. When she caught me staring, instead of being embarrassed, she held up her disaster and announced, "I think I've invented a new art form. Chaos theory painting." The whole class erupted in laughter, and suddenly the tension in the room dissolved like watercolor in rain. After class, as we cleaned brushes at the communal sink, she introduced herself as Helen and asked if I'd ever seen anything quite so spectacularly awful. I told her my painting looked like a tree had been struck by lightning during an earthquake, and she laughed so genuinely it caught me off guard. We started talking about the instructor's technique, then about art in general, then about the Italian films she'd mentioned loving. Before I knew it, we'd been talking for 2 hours, and the janitor was politely waiting to lock up the building. Walking to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. That electric buzz of having connected with another human being. But driving home, the guilt hit me like a physical weight pressing on my chest. I spent that entire night arguing with myself, pacing between the kitchen and living room like a caged animal. Part of me wanted to skip the next class entirely, to retreat back into the safe cocoon of my grief and routine. But another part, a part I thought had died with Margaret, was curious about what Helen might paint next week. When Thursday came around again, I found myself driving to the community center despite every rational argument against it. Helen was already there, wearing a paint-splattered apron and setting up what looked like enough supplies for 3 people. "I decided to come prepared this time," she announced. "Though, knowing me, I'll still create something that looks like a food fight." But honestly, I was returning for those conversations that stretched long after everyone else had packed up and left. Helen told me about her husband Robert, who'd passed from cancer 3 years earlier, and how she'd moved here to be closer to her sister. I found myself sharing stories about Margaret that I hadn't told anyone, not even my kids. Funny memories, private jokes, Ordinary moments that had become precious. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Robert's memory by laughing again, she admitted quietly while cleaning her brushes. Without thinking, I told her something I'd never said out loud before. That Margaret used to worry about me being alone. The last coherent conversation we had, she made me promise not to become one of those bitter old men who gives up on joy, I confessed. That's when I realized this wasn't about replacing anyone or forgetting the past. It was about honoring the love we've been given by staying open to life. The conversation I had with my kids that weekend was one of the most difficult and important of my life. But Sarah surprised me by saying, "Dad, Mom spent her last months worried you'd turn into a hermit." Maybe this is exactly what she hoped for. We talked for hours about grief, about loyalty, about the difference between moving on and moving forward. Michael eventually admitted his real fear wasn't about me dating. It was about losing me too. And somehow this felt like tempting fate. "I know this sounds crazy," I whispered to her smiling face. "But I think I need to tell you about Helen." I told Margaret's picture about Helen's terrible painting skills, her infectious laugh, her kindness to the other class members. The next week, I asked Helen if she'd like to grab coffee after class. My hands were shaking like I was 16 again. She said yes so quickly I wondered if she'd been hoping I'd ask. And we spent 3 hours at the diner talking about everything and nothing. That was 11 months ago. And Helen and I have been seeing each other regularly ever since. We're not living together. We're both too set in our ways and too respectful of our grown children's adjustment periods. But we've found this beautiful rhythm of shared dinners, weekend art projects, and long phone calls every morning with coffee. Helen has met my kids and grandchildren, and they've grown to adore her, especially after she taught the grandkids her chaos painting technique. Michael came around completely when he saw how she encouraged my stories about Margaret instead of seeming threatened by them. What surprises me most is how different this love feels from what Margaret and I shared. Not better or worse, just entirely its own thing. With Margaret, we grew up together, built a life from scratch, weathered decades of changes and challenges side by side. With Helen, we're two fully formed people choosing to blend our already complete lives because we enjoy each other's company. I never imagined I'd have someone new to share the funny stories about my day, or to worry about when they mention feeling under the weather. Some people our age think we're being foolish, that we should be content with our memories and our grandchildren. But you know what I've learned? The heart doesn't retire just because the body gets older. Love doesn't have an expiration date stamped on it like milk cartons in the refrigerator. If you've lost someone you love deeply, please hear this. Grieving doesn't have a deadline, but neither does the capacity for joy. You're not betraying anyone's memory by allowing your heart to heal enough to care about someone new. Helen and I are planning a trip to Italy next spring to see those films we love translated back into their original landscapes. My grandchildren ask when we're getting married, and honestly, we haven't decided if that matters at our age. What matters is that we've found companionship, laughter, and yes, love, when we thought that chapter was permanently closed. So whether you're 35 or 75, whether you've lost someone or just feel lost yourself, remember this truth. It's never too late to surprise yourself with the resilience of your own heart. Love doesn't ask for your age, your history, or your permission. It just asks for your courage to stay open. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to stay open, love surprises you in ways you never saw coming.